Hi all, this is Dr. Antonelli again, back for part 3 of our topic 8 PowerPoint of instructional strategies and approaches to instruction. In parts 1, we talked about the big ideas as well as the case study of the Oregon Trail. We talked about the 2 approaches to instruction, teacher and learner directed. We talked about the theoretical perspectives that work the best with each of those methods of instruction. We talked about some interdependent relationships, and then a number of things about planning for teachers in reference to desired end results, writing goals and objectives. We talked about some specific observable behavior terms to use in those objectives, the taxonomy or categories of objectives, as well as specifically the cognitive one of Bloom's. We also talked about how it's important for our students setting their own goals and objectives to increase motivation and a number of other skills. Breaking a task down for teachers when they're planning, doing a task analysis. We also talked about the step-by-step lesson plan and kind of the parts of it that we would focus on, mainly 1 and 3 in this particular PowerPoint. And then the step-by-step of an actual lesson plan. And then we got into more detail about those behavioral and cognitive theoretical perspectives with teacher-directed. Here's where we left off. We were into the learner-directed, also known as non-direct instruction, meaning non-direct because the teacher is not kind of the star on the stage here. The teacher does play a huge role in learner-directed instruction, but almost from the background, if you think about it. They set everything up, they structure the plan, they provide students with what they need, and then students take over at that point with their own learning. Okay, so one of the theoretical perspectives that works best with the learner-directed instruction is the humanistic perspective, where it considers students' needs, emotions, and values. It makes things meaningful and relevant to them and exciting with what they're learning because they see a connection to themselves and what they need and what they would like to learn. The classroom environment is one where there's a great deal of acceptance about all kinds of ideas that students may have. Support is clear and evident. The expectations a teacher has are also very clear to students, but achievable expectations, things that they can actually reach or meet. Constructive feedback is given. It's not criticism, but it's feedback on what students are doing and thinking and how they're performing. And then there's some freedom in this learner-directed, humanistic kind of model to make their own learning choices. That's the students there is, okay? And then research has shown positive results using this approach. We have increased motivation usually for students. They have positive school attitudes. They often have higher achievement levels, and they tend to exhibit lower depression, anxiety, and frustration. These are just a few. There's many, many more that fall into play, but those are the most prominent ones. Okay. The second theoretical perspective that relates to learner-directed or non-direct instruction is the social perspective, where students learn from each other in cooperative structures. They work together to accomplish kind of a shared goal that they had. Instead of those individual goals that they set, they come together as a group and have very similar or shared goals that they could come up with. There's usually no individual competition. And there's no usual individualized structures in this particular scenario. Cooperative learning is a big piece to this. We'll get to that in the next slide. And then there are lots of positive effects related to this particular model of learner-directed with the social perspective as a backup. And that is, again, increased motivation and achievement. Social interaction is very positive. There's also many models of effective thinking that comes out of working with others, and of course working with others allows each student to kind of figure out different ways of encoding information in their own heads based on what others are sharing with them. So again, positive results for all. Okay, when we talk about cooperative learning, we talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of 7 components that are absolutely necessary for it. One of them is that the groups have to be heterogeneous, and that doesn't just necessarily mean in ability groupings. It could be males, females, socioeconomic groups, students from diverse backgrounds. That's what we mean by heterogeneous groups. There's this idea of positive interdependence where students need to support one another in order to achieve the group's goal. They cannot go off on their own to do individual work without coming back together, each with a piece. Okay, so if you think about that, they each get a piece of a puzzle that they have to come together to put together. That's what positive interdependence means. It's this sink or swim together kind of attitude. Promotive interaction has to do with students helping one another. If all the students in the group, let's say, score a certain percentage on the test when it is eventually given, then they get a reward of some sort, for example. So that kind of increases the motivation for students to really help one another in reaching that group goal. Individual accountability has to do with each group member making a contribution to the group. So, for example, a teacher may collect a piece of the assignment from each student in that group, so they never really know if the teacher, is going to do that or not, but they all have to be ready for the teacher to collect an individualized piece of their work, every single member. Students are taught interpersonal skills, how to actually interact, how to ask questions, how to ask for help. They actually work through these kinds of skills before even entering into cooperative learning groups. All students are given chances to contribute into the group, so it's where the groups are monitored for every student participating. And then sometimes, even though we talked about no competition in learner-directed or cooperative learning, there could be team competition. As long as the groups are equally matched, they may compete with one another. There's just no individual competition, okay? The last few slides really give you some ideas on how teachers can really enhance how effective their instruction is. So this slide talks specifically about teacher-directed instruction. To enhance this, teachers should really begin by what using students already know and believe, kind of activating their prior knowledge. They should also use effective cognitive processes, things like graphic organizers, signals or cues to retrieve information out of students' brains, right? Visual aids that help students who are more kind of graphically, visually better at remembering things by looking at a picture, for example, versus just words, okay? So using different kinds of things that promote effective cognitive processes. Using explanations, but examples and practice as well to keep the engagement high for students. And then, of course, we talked about technology in some of the other slides, but teacher-directed instruction can include educational software as long as it's effective and well-designed. CBI is a term to remember. It's known as computer-based instruction. And it's when students, let's say, are doing a program that has different levels, that they must complete one level to get to the next level. Usually kind of a basic skills program, learning, let's say, the mathematical facts of multiplication. The software should allow them to go levels at their own pace. And that would be a well-designed piece of software. Additional things to improve or enhance teacher-directed instruction to be effective is asking a lot of questions, but not just questions that have yes-no answers or kind of closed-ended with one answer. Asking higher-level questions, open-ended questions, questions that require critical thinking or elaboration for students will enhance teacher-directed instruction. Using homework assignments that are, of course, age-appropriate, of a good quality, and that kind of expand the work a bit, not something that's very repetitive and is not going to really elaborate on what students did in the school day for that particular, let's say, lesson, okay? And then, of course, we want to shoot for mastery of basic knowledge and skills, because mastery of basic building blocks is very important, because if students don't master the building blocks, they can't get to the next level. And if we move on, someone will be left behind at the next level if they don't have the building block to get them through to that next level, okay? For learner-directed instruction, a few things that teachers can do to enhance their effectiveness is provide students with issues to discuss that have multiple ways of looking at them. Again, more open-ended, things that they, there isn't just one way or one answer, but they can, approach it from a different, angle, such as math problems that there can be multiple either solutions to or multiple ways to get to a solution, okay? Making the classroom environment conducive to open debate, the support idea of allowing students to voice their opinions and to evaluate an idea constructively without feeling criticized. And this is a term called hot cognition. It's where students just get really kind of really interested in a topic, and they really want to speak their mind and give their opinion, and they kind of just basically feel this is something of interest to me and I really want to participate. It's kind of a hot topic, think of it that way. In addition, teachers can enhance effectiveness of learner-directed instruction by conducting activities that students have to depend on each other to actually learn it. So giving each student, a piece, like we talked about in cooperative learning, that piece needs to be brought into a discussion with other students and their pieces in order to learn, okay? Have students conducting their own research about new topics, discovery, also known as discovery or inquiry learning from Jerome Bruner. This is a great thing to use for learner-directed instruction. And of course, these are topics that hopefully students have an interest in. And then having students teach one another, this peer tutoring idea. Research has found that both those being tutored and those doing the tutoring have positive impacts on their learning, okay? Assigning authentic, real-world, kind of genuine tasks, things that they see themselves doing one day, things that they see a need for in the community by doing service learning or simulations of some sort. These are genuine things that they see a purpose and a reason for doing, okay? Using technology, of course, to enhance communication. We have things like emails, chat rooms, blogs, things where we can set up students working with other students. Of course, there's a lot of monitoring that needs to be done with that, but that's one of those tools to enhance effectiveness of collaborating, between students. And then provide sufficient scaffolding to make sure that students understand the task, that the directions are clear, that there's structure to it, that there's time limits, that the right questions are being asked. Those are all kinds of things that teachers need to do to make sure that learner-directed instruction stays on task and doesn't go off in a direction that really is not productive for the group, let's say, or the students who are, researching something or problem solving in a group or something like that, okay? And some big final ideas to remember for either using teacher-directed or learner-directed instruction, and that is we always need to look at the differences within the groups we are teaching. These differences can be cultural differences, gender differences, socioeconomic differences when we're planning. So for example, we know that boys tend to have a more competitive side, girls tend to be more cooperative. So when we're planning instruction, how is that going to help us? Knowing that. Different cultural groups, like Asian groups have more used to more teacher-directed, taking direction in a more direct way from a teacher, whereas Hispanic and Native American groups tend to be more learner-directed. They work better as teams in cooperation because their family backgrounds tend to be of that manner, where they work together to get things done, okay? Other things to remember is to differentiate instruction, known as DI, to take all the levels of students into account and any special needs that there might be. Okay, so for example, developmental levels of, let's say, younger students needing a lot more structure and direction and steps of how to do things, and older students needing a little less of that. Okay, so again, being a little more involved with the younger students when walking around if they're directing themselves, or to give them more guidance than you would older students once directions are clear. Okay, and then finally, to remember that there is no single best approach to instruction. There's so many approaches out there and different ways of teaching and strategies to use that it is best to try to use multiple instructional approaches even in a single lesson, so that we can hit upon all of the differences within that group of students that we are teaching. Okay, so that last and final idea is a really important one to remember and will help you with your planning and then with your actual implementation of your lesson plan. Okay, so if you have any questions, please send me an email about anything in the PowerPoint, and I will be glad to explain it further to you and get back to you. Okay, great. Have a great day.